Hello everyone, my name is Dan Alder and I extend to you a very warm welcome and I thank you for joining me today. I would like to address the subject of how does the sage Patanjali view our mind? That is to ask, what does Patanjali believe to be our potential and what does he believe to be what gets in the way of us finding or attaining that potential. So this little chat will be broken into 3 sections. The first section will be the goal. What is the goal of Patanjali's teachings? And then what are the problems? That is to ask, what is going to prevent us from moving towards that goal that Patanjali has set? And then finally, the means. What is the means by which we bridge the gap from where we currently are towards where Patanjali has stated our full potential may lie? So it's a pretty big subject, but I hope that I can explain it in a way that gets you nodding along in agreement, because some of what I'll tell you will be things that you already know. Indeed, I will be telling you a little bit about yourself. The goal of yoga. You may think that there is no goal to yoga, but Patanjali has stated that yoga is mind fluctuation cessation. So yoga is the goal, not the practice. Yeah? So when we talk about yoga practice, in a way, we're not talking about it correctly. Patanjali's final result is yoga. And how does one reach this final result that is yoga? It is by bringing the mind's fluctuations to stillness. So that is the goal. The goal is to bring your mind to stillness so that there is no thought whatsoever inside of your mind. And then you have yoga. And what is yoga? Yoga is union. Now, this is all based on a couple of assumptions. And one of the assumptions is that we each have a story inside of our own head, mostly due to this thing called ego, or the thing inside your mind that refers to you as I, and that I refer to myself as me. This thing called ego tells me that I'm different. I'm separate from everything else. And along with that story of separateness comes a little bit or a huge amount of suffering. But whether it's just a little bit of suffering or a huge amount, there is separation. And as long as there is a perceived separation, I'm going to believe a union is the answer to my problem. But this is what Patanjali wants you to know. That a union should be outright rejected. And I know that that must have sounded crazy, so I'll say it again. Union, or yoga, should be rejected. And the reason for this is because things are already whole and united. Things cannot be in any other way. That is the natural state of things. Everything, whether it's a galaxy trillions of miles away, or whether it's you or me or the grass outside, it is already a part of the whole. It is already unified with that which it should be unified with. And there is nothing we can do about it. So there's nothing that we can do in our mind or with our body that will change the fact that we are already one with, unified, complete and whole with all other things. So that in itself is a pretty big idea and might take a little bit of thinking about. And this is why Patanjali says that yoga, or union, comes when the mind's fluctuations cease. It's because when our story of separation falls away or stops, that we finally find union, because all the rest of the time we're just thinking that we're separate. That idea can be explained via a few other words, one of those being kaivalya, which is absolute freedom or absolute liberation. Freedom from what, you might ask? Specifically, freedom from the kleshas, and I'll address those real soon. Another way of expressing the idea is when one is in samadhi, and samadhi is just another term which means the accomplishment for having brought the mind's fluctuations to stillness. And it also refers to the idea that your own nature has vanished. So you're inquisitive, curious, thinking, is this true? Is this false? Is this right? Is this wrong? This nature of our mind to be constantly on the go, that vanishes. And what's left is this ineffable, unspeakable peace, samadhi, yoga, kaivalya. What makes it so difficult for this state of mind to be attained? There are many things that make this state of mind difficult to be attained, and Patanjali has been pretty thorough about naming them. The first things that Patanjali tell us are the difficulties or the problems are thoughts themselves. So if yoga is mind fluctuation cessation, or another way of thinking of that, yoga is the cessation of thought, then thoughts themselves are a part of the problem. So Patanjali tells us that thoughts come in 5 types, and that each of those 5 types will be either pleasant or painful, but they will be one or the other. And sometimes I think people just want their mind to be full of pleasant, kind, compassionate, and loving thoughts. And I think that is a good thing to cultivate in your mind, in life. But even those very, very virtuous thoughts will hinder or prevent the mind coming to stillness. So that is another big idea in my mind. The fact that we're not trying to only cultivate goodness in our mind, but we're actually trying to remove goodness equally as wickedness in our own mind. And that is how the mind comes to stillness. Now, those 5 types of fluctuations, it's probably unnecessary to go into detail about them, only to say that in Patanjali's mind, there is no good thought or bad thought. There is only yoga or not yoga. There is only a mind that is fluctuating or a mind that is not fluctuating. So thoughts are a problem that we all encounter on our way towards finding absolute peace. There's another set of ideas called the obstacles, and I'm sure that you'll be able to identify with each of these. So I'll just put my glasses on so I can read them. They are illness, sloth, doubt, carelessness, idleness, intemperance, confusion, and knowledge unattained. Now, I'm sure each of those speak for themselves, but what I think is worth a mention is that final one, knowledge unattained. Many of us believe that if only you knew what they knew, if only I knew what Patanjali knew, then I would find it easier to get to peace. But that in itself is a problem that we each need to overcome, because knowledge will not solve our problem. We have to dispense of knowledge, because knowledge, after all, is simply just more fluctuations of the mind. Whether the knowledge is right or wrong, true or false, knowledge itself prevents the mind from coming to stillness. So you are doing yourself a disservice by thinking that you need to know more to bring your mind to peace. Quite the opposite is true. You need to disband all your knowledge, only temporarily, mind you, if you are to bring your mind to peace. So they are the obstacles. Now, there's also another set of ideas, and they are called the kleshas. And they are really the main thing that we must overcome in our practice. And the reason I say they're the main thing is because think of it like this. Those mind fluctuations or thoughts that I just mentioned and those obstacles, they're a bit like software. We're able to train ourselves to think along certain lines. We can discard bad thoughts and replace them with good thoughts, and that can become habitual for us. Same too with the obstacles. What was a very difficult obstacle for us a week ago or a year ago, we have learned to overcome so that next time we encounter it, it's easier to overcome. So in a sense, we're able to tinker and improve upon the thoughts in our mind and how we overcome the obstacles. So that's like a software, an upgrade to a software program. But the kleshas are like our hardware, and they are the things upon which our mind are built from birth. So we cannot be completely free from these things, and we cannot tinker with them. All we can do is overcome them. So what are the kleshas? Well, klesha is a word that means affliction, or if you like, a poison of the mind. They are the root cause of why a mind that might otherwise be completely tranquil and serene are disturbed, and suffering results from that. Now, there are 5 afflictions, and the first one is avidya, and that is a word that means to not know. Now, you might think to yourself, if not knowing is the problem, then knowing is the solution. But that's not quite it. So the way in which we overcome avidya is not through knowledge, but actually through ceasing the fluctuations of the mind. Because it's then that a certain something happens, and it's an abstract idea, so I won't begin to talk about it. But it's not knowledge that we should be seeking, but rather it is this idea that the more and more quiet the mind becomes, we start to gradually feel more and more a part of the whole and less separated from it. So avidya is described by Patanjali as being the fertile ground from which all the other afflictions grow. So if there's no avidya, then there will be no other afflictions. But as long as there is avidya, then the others will have a nice place to grow. So the other afflictions are egoism, asmita. So the ego is just the I-ness of our experience. So as long as there is I-ness, there is otherness, and that is the separation. So in this moment right now, there is me and there is the camera. So I am different from the camera, or I am different to the people seeing me on their screens somewhere else. So as long as there is I-ness, there is otherness, and this is the beginning of suffering. Then there is the third affliction, and this is raga. So raga is translated as lust. And so this is lust for power, lust for life, even lust for spiritual enlightenment, lust for anything. It's all going to disrupt your mind to no end. And lust comes about because of pleasure. So there's nothing wrong with pleasure, but there kind of is something wrong with craving for pleasure. And if we crave enough, it morphs into the lust scenario. So that's very disturbing to the mind. Then there is the fourth affliction, and that is dvesha, or hatred. And hatred is a result of suffering. And again, there is nothing wrong with suffering. Suffering is a part of life. But when we develop aversions to suffering, and particularly if that aversion becomes extreme, it will turn into hatred. We will begin to hate what causes us to suffer, and that will disturb your mind to no end. And then finally, there is the fifth affliction, abhinivesha. And this is the instincts to cling to life. And this is playing in the background of our mind at all times, in almost every single decision we make. In every plan, there is a question silently answered in the back of our mind, and that is, will this action prolong my life, and will it keep me from death? So these 5 afflictions are problems. They're a part of life though, so we're stuck with them. And what Patanjali is essentially telling us is that we are to overcome these problems. Not to abolish them, not to kill them off, but to overcome them. And I think a nice analogy for this is the hurdlers at the Olympics, for example. Now, if like the 100-meter sprinters, they just get to start at the start and sprint as fast as they can to the finish line, that seems like a pretty easy path. But the hurdler, they have to confront these walls. So what happens if the hurdler just runs to a wall and then stops and says, I can't get past that? Well, that's where it ends for them. And so what does the hurdler do? They jump over that little wall and then they encounter another one. Do they stop or do they jump over it? And this is how we should view the obstacles, the thoughts of our mind, and the afflictions. They are like walls that make it more difficult, but not impossible, for us to reach the goal of attaining unspeakable peace, yoga. And I think that analogy can play out a little bit more, just in the sense that the 100-meter sprint is what we would all like our spiritual practice to be. Just, from start to end, in 10 seconds flat, we become enlightened. How nice would that be? Well, the bad news is it's a little longer and more difficult than that. We should probably view our spiritual practice as a decades-long steeplechase, where we are going to encounter obstacles very, very regularly. And that means that we have to consistently overcome obstacles. Otherwise, we'll just remain where we are. So it's a bit like anything, really. The learning process, the overcoming of difficulty in anything we choose to pursue in life is always going to either make or break what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So there's a bit about the problems. And then there is the solution, or the means by which we address the problems. Now, Patanjali's given us a number of ways to do this, and the single most effective way is vairagya. And vairagya means dispassion. And that is to say, we should not be moved one way or the other about the outcomes of our mind. So what does that mean? Well, let's say that you try to do something, and let's say you do it really well. Well, you shouldn't get too uppity and happy about having done it well, because that will lead towards pride. And likewise, you shouldn't be too down on yourself or too critical of yourself, because that will lead to diminishing yourself. So we should keep an even footing at all times. And remember that we are always just one moment away from both our very best selves and our very worst selves. And so dispassion is a way of being able to glide through all our emotional and mental states without letting those states stick to us. Yeah? But we can shed them off almost as quickly as they come in contact with us. So vairagya, dispassion, whatever arises into your mind, whether it be something beautiful and wonderful, or whether it be something horrific and terrible, what we should do is avoid attachment to it. So we don't want to attach to the wonderful and beautiful and say, oh, you're so beautiful, I love you. But rather, let it go as easily as it came to us. And likewise with something horrific, don't attach to it and hug it tight and say, I love you. And also don't hug it so tight that you try and squeeze the life out of it and try to kill it, because that is just really feeding the monster in a sense. So regardless of the quality of what arises in your mind, be dispassionate towards it, and you'll find that things go as smoothly and as easily as they came to you. So the other teaching that goes along with vairagya is abhyasa, and this is practice. So it goes without saying that if you want to get better at something, you must practice. So Patanjali says, practice, 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 practice. Continue to practice. What happens is that we end up mastering things that we couldn't do a year ago, but we will always find that there are things in front of us that we are yet to overcome. So practice is the key to consistently overcoming these obstacles and problems. So then there is this great bit of advice by Patanjali, and he recommends 4 different attitudes. So to all the things that arise in your mind, we should respond in one of the 4 ways: friendliness, compassion, delight, or disregard. Now, that 4th one might be a little odd to you, and it might require a little explaining, because I think friendliness, compassion, and delight are unneeding of any elaboration. It would be lovely to respond to everything that arises within us with those 3 attitudes. But sometimes things arise in us that is quite horrible or wicked. And so friendliness, compassion, and delight are not appropriate for those types of thoughts that we have. And so this is where the attitude of disregard comes to play. And disregard is no different than dispassion. It is simply to say, give that wicked thought no regard. Do not take it on board and do not push it away. Just simply, like vairagya, allow it to come. Don't push it down. Don't suppress it. Don't express it. As smoothly as it comes, let it smoothly go. Yeah? So I think that that's a terrific piece of advice for how things arise within us. And likewise, it's not a bad bit of advice for, how we operate within the world as well. Patanjali gives us other ideas about how we can move the mind towards a peaceful place. And I won't go into these particular sutras, but if you're curious, in chapter 1, sutras 34 through to sutra 39, there's half a dozen ideas there that, if practiced, will calm your mind to a point where you're able to begin proper meditation. And then we have the idea of the 8 limbs. Now, this is something that you may have already been introduced to, but I've got a feeling that I might explain it to you in a way that you have not come across before. Now, the 8 limbs have been devised by Patanjali for one purpose, and that purpose is overcoming the afflictions. And which affliction in particular? The first one, the one which gives fertile ground for all the others to grow in, avidya. So the entire 8 limbs is all about liberating ourselves from the affliction of avidya. So just as Patanjali introduces the 8 limbs to us by name, he tells us that there are certain types of thoughts which disturb the mind, and he calls these vitarka. Now, vitarka is essentially harmful thoughts, untruthful thoughts, envious thoughts, thoughts of a sexual nature, and thoughts of possession. And what he tells us is to oppose these types of thoughts or to neutralize these thoughts. And so that leads us into the first limb, yama, because the first limb is about establishing a mind that is free from harmful thoughts, contains truthful thoughts, contains thoughts that are free from desire, contains thoughts which are free of a sexual nature, and also contains thoughts which are free of possession and ownership. So vitarka is the opposite to what needs to be established. And yet you might know from your own experience that these vitarkas are very regular in your own mind. Certainly they are quite regular in my own mind. So establishing the yamas is a very difficult thing to do. But I think of the 8 limbs a bit like dominoes. There are 8 dominoes. And if we push over the first one, the rest will fall quite easily and naturally. Now, the thing about pushing over that first domino, that is to say, the thing about establishing the yamas, is that it requires enormous time, diligence, persistence, and practice. But once we have developed all those things and we knock over the first domino, that is to say, we become established in the first limb. The second limb, the third limb, the fourth limb, the fifth and the sixth and the seventh and the 8th limb are knocked over naturally, almost by consequence. In fact, that's exactly how Patanjali expresses it to us. It's a cause and effect. Yeah, knocking over the first domino causes the second one to fall. Yeah, which causes the third one to fall, and so on and so on. So when yama is established, then niyama is essentially ready to be knocked over. When that is, when the yogi has established niyama, the second limb, then asana is very easy for the yogi. And when I say asana, I'm not talking about all the postures that you do in a regular yoga class. I'm talking specifically to what Patanjali defines as being simply comfortable and stable. It's a sitting posture. There's nothing fancy about it at all. It's simply position your body in a way that is comfortable and stable. That's the third limb accomplished, yeah? Because when the mind is peaceful, the body can be still and comfortable for long periods of time. Then there is the fourth limb, pranayama. And pranayama is just the establishment of a breath which is long and subtle and free from any irregularities. And that is a result. So you don't need to force pranayama. You do not force a long and subtle breath. It is the result of a mind that is peaceful and a body that is comfortable. And when pranayama is established, the fifth limb, pratyahara, is now ready. That is when the mind withdraws from its sense objects, which is thoughts. So just as sound is a sense object for the ear, thought is a sense object for the mind. So the mind withdraws from taking notice of the things which occur within it. And that is the end of preparation. Preparation ends with pratyahara. And then the sixth limb is the beginning of proper meditation. And Dharana is low-level meditation, but it is proper meditation. The seventh limb, dhyana, this is, again, proper meditation, and it is better than or above dharana, but lower than samadhi. And then finally, there is samadhi, which is essentially defined as when you disappear, when there is no longer a you there to discern what is and what is not, between you and the object of your meditation. In samadhi, you are not there to experience, because as soon as you arrive again in the experience, there is that separation. So it is unfortunate that should you be diligent and disciplined enough to work towards samadhi and actually attain it, you will not be there to experience it. That's just one of those things, I guess. So that is all I have time for. I hope that I've been able to shed a little light on those questions. What is the goal of yoga? What prevents us from attaining the goal? And what helps us? What are the things that we can practice towards that goal? And I know that I've spoken about things in terms of reaching our potential, what is possible. But if I could leave you with one final piece of advice, it would simply be this. Begin with yama, the first limb. Try to free your mind of the harmful thoughts, etc. And be happy to remain there. Do not go looking for lofty states of meditation because, like I said, the way in which the teachings are presented as cause and effect, if you can establish yourself in yama, in the first limb, the others will follow almost effortlessly. So there's no need for you to try to concentrate, but you do need to initially try to combat those disturbing thoughts that occur within your mind. All right, well, it's been my pleasure, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this. My name is Dan Alder, and I'd love to see you again sometime. Bye.